What family secret did you learn that totally shocked you? Story 1. My great-grandfather was a quiet, kind man and the treasurer for his chapter of the Elks Lodge in Texas. One night, on his way home from an Elks Lodge meeting, he was attacked. He lost his memory and later regained consciousness as a sailor aboard a ship bound for Haiti. After arriving, he lived in the country for a few months before getting into a bar fight with a police officer. During the altercation, he was knocked out. When he woke up in jail, his memory suddenly returned. He shared his story with a priest who believed him and wanted to help. The priest reached out to my great-grandmother and the American government, and somehow he managed to convince the Haitian authorities to allow him to return home. Once back in the U.S., he reunited with my great-grandmother, had 2 children, and lived the rest of his life as a law-abiding citizen. This story is so unbelievable that when my mother told me about it 6 months ago, I was convinced it was a hoax. But she has documents, letters from the priest and other records, as well as testimonials from his friends, who all insisted that this kind of behavior was completely out of character for him. I don't know. Crazy, right? Story 2. I didn't find out until recently in my 30s. At this age, not much shocks you anymore. But if I had known back in my teens, it would have been a different story, especially considering how religious my mother was back then. She constantly warned us about the dangers of premarital relationships. In my early 20s, when my girlfriend and I moved to a new city where we didn't know anyone, she tried to stop us from living together. Obviously, we still did, but we had to hide it whenever she came to visit. When some unmarried friends of mine had a baby unexpectedly, who was sadly born with a physical disability, she even insinuated that it was a punishment for having a child out of wedlock. So, guess what? A few months ago, my aunt casually mentioned that the reason my parents got married after knowing each other for only 4 months was because my mother was pregnant. She later miscarried, which is why none of us had ever put the pieces together before. Story 3. I found out when I was 22 that I had an older sister. She passed away at a very young age due to a heart defect or something similar, before I was even born. Yet no one in my very, very large family ever let it slip, not even once. I only discovered the truth because my 2 older sisters found a letter buried in a closet years ago. They told me about it much later, long after they had processed it themselves. I never asked my parents about it. I can only imagine what kind of old wound that would reopen, and they don't need that. Instead, I quietly visited her grave by myself once and left a flower. It was a surreal feeling. Story 4. You might need a diagram to keep up with this one. My dad was born when my grandma was 18, and my grandpa was just 14. He never really looked like his supposed father and always suspected his mother had an affair. For context, my dad's family is fully Lebanese, but he's very fair-skinned, which only fueled his suspicions. When his dad's father, my great-grandfather, was on his deathbed due to cancer, a relative finally came clean. They told my dad that his grandfather was actually his biological father. So my dad had my stepmom secretly pluck a few hairs from his real father's head and sent them for DNA testing. The results confirmed everything. Yeah, a little morbid if you ask me. Basically, my grandma had an affair with a married man when she was 18, had at least 1, possibly 2, children with him, then later married his son and had another 4 kids. That means my dad's siblings are technically both his siblings and his nieces or nephews. And the man who raised him as his father was actually his brother. Yeah. I don't talk to that side of the family anymore. Story 5. Ever since I started living in apartments on my own, I've had these big pink towels. And every time someone asks about them, I tell this story. When I got my first apartment, my mom and I visited my grandparents to raid their basement for anything useful. While digging through old boxes, we found an enormous stash of big pink towels and jasmine incense. The towels didn't seem unusual, but the incense caught my attention. My grandparents didn't seem like the type to use it, let alone in bulk. So I asked about it. At that moment, my mom and grandma exchanged a look. Then one of them said, "I guess he's old enough to know." Apparently, my grandpa used to run 2 shopping centers. At one point, one of the businesses in one of those centers was a massage parlor. They seemed legit, always paid their rent on time. Then one day, my grandpa got a call. According to eyewitnesses, the conversation went something like this. "Hello. Yes, this is Grandpa's name. Yes, yes. What? A whorehouse? What do you mean I'm running a whorehouse?" Turns out it was a full-service massage parlor. When the cops caught wind of it, the owner bailed, leaving everything behind, including the entire supply of pink towels, jasmine incense, baby oil, and tissues. And my grandpa, never one to throw away anything useful, kept all of it in his basement. The towels were actually really nice, so I took a bunch, and some of the incense too. I might even call them up for more at some point. Story 6. Maybe this is the opposite of a typical family secret, but apparently my ancestors were millionaires in the late 1800s. I guess they had always been very wealthy. But with that fortune getting split up every generation, and my family spending decades constantly on the move, all that money was long gone by the time I was born. The only thing left? A chunk of property in Mexico that's basically worthless, aside from a small amount of money we get because a highway runs through it. This completely shocked me because, for as long as I've been alive, my family has been pretty poor. Full-on redneck on top of that, and riddled with addiction issues. Story 7. My family is ultra-Catholic, incredibly religious, and experts at keeping secrets. When I was 11, I found out that one of my uncles, his wife, my aunt, and their 10-year-old daughter, my cousin, had died the year before I was born. A drunk driver killed them. Their surviving children, my two cousins, were adopted by another aunt and uncle and raised as their own biological kids. No one ever talked about it. When I was 14, I stumbled upon an old wedding album at my grandma's house. It was my mother's first wedding. She had been married in 1959 at 19 years old to a man from a wealthy family. I had no idea my father was actually her second husband. When I was 17, my mother casually revealed that my older brother and sister were adopted. And not just adopted during her first marriage. I had spent my whole life believing they were my biological siblings, and they had never said a word. When I was 19, I found out the darkest secret of all. My father had abused my oldest sister. When she told my mother called her a liar and had her placed in foster care. At the time, I was about 7 years old, and my mother had told me she was sent away because she was a bad girl. My mother chose my father over her own daughter, and in doing so, she left the rest of us exposed to the same danger. There's a whole lot more, but that's all I feel like writing for now. Story 8. This isn't my family's story, but I thought I'd share it anyway. When my friend turned 15, she was told she was adopted. Her parents had both died in a car crash when she was a baby, and her uncle had taken her in and raised her as his own. She had grown up believing both of her biological parents were gone. A year later, a man reached out to her on Facebook, claiming to be her half-brother. Turns out her biological father had actually survived the car crash. He later remarried and had more children. Her adopted family had known all along but never told her. The truth was that her father simply didn't want to keep her. That was the big secret. But the story didn't end there. Her biological father wanted to meet her. She flew out to see him, met his wife and half-siblings, and wrestled with the conflicting emotions of reconnecting. She hated him for abandoning her, but at the same time, she couldn't help but love him for finally trying to be in her life. She decided to take the chance. 6 months later, he died of lung cancer. Life's cruel joke on her. Story 9. My mom married my stepfather in the mid-80s. She and my dad had been divorced since my birth in the early 70s. Since I primarily lived with her, I got used to her dating, and eventually I'd meet her boyfriends. Most of them were fine. Then came my soon-to-be stepfather. From the start, I could tell there was something off about him. I couldn't put my finger on it. Nothing obvious. Just a weird feeling. But my mom really liked him, so I kept quiet. I made it through my awkward teenage years with him around and then went off to college, still feeling like something about him wasn't right. In 1997, my mom and stepdad divorced. Toward the end of their marriage, he became increasingly impatient, and I heard they fought a lot. But by then, I had moved out, started my own life in another state, and didn't see it firsthand. After the divorce, he rarely came up in conversation. Fast forward to 2007. My mom had cancer, and it was nearing the end. I spent the last 2 weeks with her at home, just talking, reminiscing, and letting her know how much I loved her. For those who haven't watched a loved one pass from cancer, it's a brutal process. They get loopy, forgetful, and aren't fully in touch with reality. One day, as we sat together on the couch, she suddenly said, "Well, I suppose I can tell you about your stepfather now." My ears perked up. I knew something had been off about him. Maybe he had a secret kid. Maybe he went AWOL from the Army. Then she dropped the bombshell. "Your stepfather was a gay adult film star in the 70s. That was not what I had expected. Story 10. This one's not entirely about me, but it still hits close to home. I got really into tracing my ancestry, especially because my grandpa had disappeared under strange circumstances after getting very sick while working for the Navy. There was no documentation about what really happened to him, and I became obsessed with finding answers. As I dug deeper, I came across someone else who was looking for him too. We compared details, and it turned out to be 100% accurate. This was my grandpa's daughter. She had grown up in foster care, but had managed to learn some things about her dad, and she was searching for her family. It was incredibly surreal going to my dad and telling him he had a sister he never knew about. We still don't fully understand why she was given up for adoption, but she was born around the time my grandfather died and my grandma remarried. We suspect those events are connected to the decision. There are still so many unanswered questions, but we talk regularly and do our best to keep researching. Maybe someday we'll get more answers. Story 11. My great-grandfather murdered one of his own children. The family was a poor, struggling group of backwoods folks who were having trouble feeding their kids. My great-grandmother was pregnant and didn't find out until delivery that she was carrying twins. My great-grandfather's solution? He bashed one of the baby's heads against the wash basin. My grandpa wrote about this in a letter to my mom while on his deathbed. When she told me, I felt my blood turn to ice. The sheer evil of it completely shocked me. Story 12. Family legend painted my great-grandpa as a decorated soldier who fought in the Indian Regiment of British troops during World War I. In reality, he was a cook who deserted after witnessing men being sent to charge machine guns with their bodies. He and a group of others decided to nope right out of there, stealing supplies as they went. This was corroborated by the other deserters who returned with him. It took them a few years to make their way from France back to Vadodara in what is now Gujarat, India. Along the way, they sold stolen guns and rations for money. During their journey, my great-grandpa contracted an STD from an Iraqi worker. Luckily, my grandpa was born before all of this happened. They blamed that infection for why he went funny in the head towards the end of his life. The small amount of money he brought back from selling stolen army supplies helped my grandpa buy some land and kickstart our family's fortunes, allowing us to move out of the untouchable class. Story 13. In my early 20s, I found out that my oldest sister had been molested by my dad a couple of years before I was born. This has been incredibly difficult to deal with for a couple of reasons. For one, my dad is just an awful person, but I also hold my mom accountable. She stayed with him, even though she quickly learned about what had happened. Imagine knowing that if your mom had done the right thing, you wouldn't exist. That's what I live with. She should have left him the second she found out. She should have had him arrested. I shouldn't be here. But the deeper issue is with my sister. She's now in her mid-40s, and at this point, I'm certain she'll never be able to form healthy relationships, even with her own family. My siblings and I are convinced she has borderline personality disorder and may even be narcissistic. We're often on the receiving end of her abusive behavior. These days, we don't tolerate it. We want her to get help and choose not to enable her. But our mom, who is also poorly treated by her, refuses to cut ties. Story 14. I have an aunt who is incredibly sweet and mild-mannered. She's quiet and reserved, but always pleasant and well-behaved. But just around the time I was born, she ran away with her boyfriend, now my uncle, to get married, purely to spite my grandparents. They had a private wedding by the ocean, just the two of them and a pastor. She didn't tell my grandparents for months. Eventually, she went to their house for lunch after weeks of no contact. Just before leaving, she attached a note to the refrigerator that, in my dad's words, gave them a heads up. My aunt and uncle still come to birthdays, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, but we are strictly forbidden from ever mentioning the scandal. Story 15. When my grandfather emigrated from Russia to Canada with his family, he sent my grandmother and 6 of their 7 kids ahead of him. They left a day before he did. The following day, he brought my father with him, but when they arrived, he registered a slightly different spelling of their last name. Because of this, he was granted his own tract of land in Saskatchewan, separate from the one my grandmother received. He never told her about it. Years passed, and his alcoholism dragged the family into poverty. Despite this, he never sold the land or even mentioned that it existed. He eventually got sober, but he died of a heart attack at 63, taking the secret with him. Then came the will. He had left the land title behind. By that point, it had increased significantly in value. My grandmother was able to retire comfortably, and when she passed almost 15 years later, She left each of her children $10,000 in cash, each grandchild, 24 of us, $1,000, and each of her 8 great-grandchildren, $2,000. All the money was locked away in a GIC set to mature when we turned 18. The great-grandkids are set to inherit a nice college starter fund. Story 16. For 2 years before she passed, my brother lived near our great-grandmother. As she neared the end of her life, we had to bring her back from Paris to the middle of nowhere in central France. By then, her memory had started to deteriorate. She was well into her 90s. My brother would often visit her after work, and she started confusing him with my father, my grandfather, even her late husband. At first, it was difficult for him, but he got used to it. Then she started talking about her past. I always liked hearing my brother share these stories. Family history straight from the source. One day she told him about when she worked as a lavandière, a laundress, in Paris during the German occupation. She told him about a young woman who worked with her, who one day bragged about reporting a Jewish family in their neighborhood to the Gestapo. Soon after, that family was deported. My great-grandmother could not accept it. She told all the other women not to come in to work one day, saying there wasn't much laundry, nothing she couldn't handle on her own. But she didn't tell that woman. When the girl arrived, my great-grandmother grabbed her and drowned her in the pool. I'll never forget my brother calling me afterward. He sounded shaken, livid even. To this day, I still don't know exactly how to feel about it. Story 17. Growing up, my mom always told us that my brother's father, Robert, was on death row. According to her, Robert was imprisoned for multiple rapes and murders. She also claimed that he wanted to kill my brother. Just for existing, I guess. She told us this from a very young age, and it terrified my brother. To make things worse, Robert had a history of escaping from prison, which only added to my brother's fear. He was also involved in a prison riot where our cousin's father was murdered. When I became an adult, I reconnected with some extended family, including my mom's sister. One day I casually brought up the story about Robert, and my aunt looked at me like I had 6 heads. She asked me what the hell I was talking about. Apparently my brother was the result of a one-night stand at a party. My aunt said my mom was so drunk that she probably didn't even know who the father was. I decided to do some digging. I looked up Robert's prison record, and sure enough, he was in maximum security prison at the time my brother was conceived. My mom insisted she got pregnant during one of his escapes, but the records were all online. He had escaped 2 years before my brother's conception and was recaptured within months. The only other time he escaped was 3 months after my brother was born. When my brother turned 18, I told him the truth. I never brought it up with our mom, and he asked me not to. I'm not sure why, but it's been 10 years, and to this day, our mom still tells the same story about Robert, and my brother still plays along. Story 18. My great-grandmother, who I love very much, was extremely racist, having been born in the 1910s. She was the kind of woman who would lock her doors and stare at her lap if a black person parked beside her at a gas station to grab a lottery ticket. That's why I was shocked to learn that, in the 1970s, she had a long-term relationship with a black man. This man wasn't just anyone. He was a doctor or surgeon, and local legend says he once shot a home invader, then called the police and performed life-saving procedures on the guy in his living room while waiting for them to arrive. I never found out how their relationship ended, but as long as I knew her, she was extremely vocal about her prejudices. It was surreal to learn that she had once been romantically involved with someone she would have later looked down upon. Story 19. In the early 1960s, my grandma, on my mom's side, gave birth to a baby girl out of wedlock. Her parents forced her to give the baby up for adoption. After that, she and the baby's father broke up, and she met my Opa. She got pregnant with my mom and decided to marry him. Fast forward through 4 more kids in a few decades. In 1997, my Opa was on his deathbed, dying from lung cancer caused by years of smoking. Before he passed, he called all 5 of his children, who were now in their 30s, some with kids of their own, into the hospital room. That's when he told them they had an older half-sister. To this day, my grandma still doesn't know that her children and grandchildren are aware of her first child. She's almost 80 now, and no one wants to upset her. That means we won't get to find out about this missing part of our family until after she's gone. Story 20. My mom has an older brother and a younger sister. The younger sister had a different father than my mom and uncle, but no one thought much of it. Then when my grandmother passed away, they were sorting through her old belongings and discovered something shocking. My uncle actually had a different father too. His biological father had been on his way to the hospital when my uncle was born, but he died in a car crash before he could make it. It gets crazier. The family tried to research my uncle's dad, but after a while they hit dead ends and gave up. Then last summer, my aunt received a letter from a woman claiming they were related. After running blood tests, they confirmed it. My grandmother and this mystery man had multiple children together, all of whom had been given up for adoption. In the past 6 months, my family has gained another aunt, a cousin, and now we've just learned that my mom has yet another brother. I flew to New York to meet my new aunt and cousin, and now the entire family is talking about meeting up. Story 21. Throwaway because I don't know if any of my family members browse Reddit. My grandmother passed away last year. She had been threatening to die for decades, but actually lived into her late 80s. I couldn't bring myself to mourn her. Knowing what she was like as a mother and as a person, I just couldn't. She wasn't a bad grandmother, to be honest. Most of my cousins would say she was fine, but the truth about her was much darker. My mother, the eldest of 8 children, told me that some of her earliest memories were of her mother saying, "It's all your fault. If you weren't here, I could have gotten away." She first heard this when she was 4 years old. She kept hearing it well into her late teens. By the time my mother was 6, she was cooking, cleaning, shopping, and looking after her younger siblings. One of her brothers even thought she was his mother. My grandfather was a violent alcoholic, a terrifying figure at 6 feet 4 inches and immensely strong from years of hard labor. But what my mother and her siblings only learned much later was that his rage. Story 22. When my grandma passed away, we had to put her parents' farm in Tennessee up for auction. That's when we hit a snag. Part of the property legally belonged to Cousin Jack. Who the hell is Cousin Jack? I had never heard of him. No one in the family had ever mentioned him. Turns out one of my great aunts had an illegitimate son in 1930 with a man who later became an esteemed mayor. That son, Jack, disappeared in 1948 under very hush-hush circumstances. The farm sold at auction, and Jack's share, $150,000, went into escrow with the state, waiting for him to claim it. We hired an ex-FBI agent to track him down. What he found was insane. Jack had been a dirty prize fighter in Chicago, changed his name, and started passing himself off as an American Indian. Eventually, the agent located him, living in government housing just 30 miles away. Jack was elated when we told him about the money. The next day, Jack was arrested. Turns out he had skipped bail 30 years earlier after a drunken knife fight that left his roommate dead. He went to prison and died 2 years later. The money ended up going to his ex-wife, whose mother had originally posted his bail decades before. And then things got even weirder. Jack hadn't just disappeared to avoid his murder charges. Apparently, during World War II, the local doctor's wife got pregnant while the doctor was deployed overseas. When he came home and found out, he and Jack killed the man responsible. At the time, my grandfather was the county sheriff. He found evidence linking the doctor to the murder. Shoe prints matching the doctor's shoes. He arrested him, but the doctor threatened to rat out Jack. Then the shoes disappeared, Jack disappeared, the doctor was acquitted. No one spoke a word about it for 60 years, until we found Jack. So, yeah, my cousin was a multiple murderer. My grandfather helped cover it up, and my entire family kept a mafia-level code of silence for more than half a century. Story 23. Where do I even begin? First off, the neighbors on both sides of my grandparents' house are sisters. That's kind of cool. But somehow, I'm also related to them. Neat. Oh, and one of them is married to their uncle. Then there's my mom's gay uncle. She loved him dearly, but the rest of the family shunned him. He moved across the country and eventually died of HIV on Christmas. No one ever talks about him anymore. It's heartbreaking. My mom still talks fondly of him, and I honestly wish I had gotten the chance to meet him. And as it turns out, there are a lot of gay people in my extended family. I had no idea until I came out myself. Mom's cousin had a boyfriend in college, now married to a woman. Dad's aunt has a wife, my late great uncle. My dad's cousin married a very masculine woman, clearly as a cover. I've never met most of them. Given how things went for my other relatives, I've been avoiding coming out to my extended family. Seems like it didn't go well for anyone else. Story 24. I used to have a step-aunt and step-cousins. I had known them since birth. We were super close, basically family. Then one day, they vanished. I didn't see or hear from them for almost 10 years. Then one day I ran into one of my step-cousins at a burger joint. I asked what happened. Apparently, my grandfather had molested her and her sister. They cut off all contact, and he had passed away about a year before I saw her again. I was shocked. This was the man I spent my summers with, eating amazing food, listening to his war stories, sharing my life with. I couldn't wrap my head around it. When I asked my mom, she gave me his version of the story. He claimed he had walked in on them experimenting with each other. He got furious and verbally lashed out at them for being incestuous. They were half-sisters. He said they panicked and accused him of molestation before he could tell their mom. I'll never know the truth. Either way, it's a disturbing family secret. Almost no one in the family knows about it. What I do know is that after they cut ties, his mental health went into a downward spiral. He would wake up in the middle of the night, yelling in his sleep about missing his daughter. Story 25. This is more of an investigation than a secret, but it's still something I've never shared. My Uncle B was a severe hero addict. Eventually, his addiction caught up with him, and his apartment was raided. He ended up going to prison for 2 years. When he got out, he seemed fully committed to sobriety, like many addicts do when they first get out. 2 weeks later, my grandmother found my Uncle D dead on her living room floor. Hero overdose. Now here's where things get twisted. Uncle A, another one of their brothers, was well known for selling all kinds of drugs, but he had a strict no-hero policy. He even encouraged me to study hero addiction in college. He constantly preached about how it was the most dangerous drug out there. About a week after Uncle B passed, I was at a party talking to a guy who used to buy various drugs from Uncle A. At some point, he casually mentioned how hard it must be for our family, with Uncle A giving Uncle B the hero that day. I froze. I started doing my own research, talking to the right people, asking the right questions, and I put the pieces together. Uncle A had secretly been selling hero for years. He was just as deep in it as the people he looked down on. Worse, he was the one who gave Uncle B the hero that killed him. He was even at my grandmother's house a few hours before Uncle B died. He left shortly before it happened. The worst part? The autopsy showed that the arm with the final needle mark had only that one injection site. The coroner said there was a good chance someone else shot him up. It's been 4 years. I've never told anyone, and I don't think I ever will. But deep down, I'm pretty sure my uncle killed his own brother. Not intentionally, but still. And it kills me that the rest of my family still believes Uncle A has nothing to do with hero at all. Story 26. This one didn't shock me, it humbled me. It turns out my grandpa was considered a World War II hero. Since he died when I was 5, I never got to know him that well. I knew he had served in the Navy, but I never understood what he had actually done. One of my earliest memories of him still sticks out. I was 4 years old and my family went swimming at a local lake in northwest Pennsylvania. It was a warm summer day, warmer than usual. Everyone was in swimsuits ready to swim, except for my grandpa. He was fully dressed, wearing long pants and a collared shirt, like always. Being an innocent kid, I asked, "Grandpa, how could you have been in the Navy if you don't know how to swim?" He looked at me, smiled, and simply said, "I know how to swim." I just shrugged it off as old people being weird. Years later, at his funeral, the family was given his war diary. It documented his experiences in the Navy. One entry stood out. It was titled Torpedoes. His ship had been hit by Japanese torpedoes. The crew, including my grandfather, had to survive for days in the open ocean, waiting to be rescued. He knew how to swim. Story 27. On the night of my baptism, when I was 8 years old, just 20 days before Christmas, we came home to find our house had burned down. We lost almost everything, but the insurance payout allowed our family to get out of debt. Coincidentally, my mother had recently moved many irreplaceable family heirlooms to storage, so those were spared. Years later, while spending time with my aunt, who had a history of substance abuse, I heard a shocking claim. She said that my mother's side of the family had orchestrated the fire and had chosen that night because they knew we would be away. For years, I dismissed it as the ramblings of someone struggling with addiction until the day I confronted my mother and she admitted it. According to her, my aunt had tampered with some of the Christmas decorations to cause an electrical overload. I have no idea how, since this happened nearly 30 years ago. The fire was officially ruled an accident and no one ever questioned it. Story 28. When I was little and probably 4 or 5, I overheard my older sisters mention our brother. Confused because as far as I knew, it was just the 3 of us girls. I asked my dad what they meant. He firmly told me that I didn't have a brother and later warned my sisters never to talk about it around me again. Fast forward 8 or 9 years to when I was 13. One day I answered the door to find my sister standing there with a guy who looked exactly like the male version of me. That's when I learned the truth. I did have a brother. My dad had an affair with his mother, which was actually the reason he and my sister's mom got divorced. He had been paying child support for my brother's entire life while keeping it a secret from me and most of the family. My brother grew up with his mother and the man he still calls dad. He's much closer to them than to us, and of the three of us sisters, I'm the only one he keeps in contact with at all. Story 29. I have two uncles, one from my mom's side, one from my dad's side, who I never met but who both lived with their respective parents while I was growing up. For years, I never questioned why I was strictly forbidden from visiting either set of grandparents without calling first. If I tried, I'd get in serious trouble. It wasn't until much later that I found out the disturbing truth. Both uncles were convicted criminals, and not only that, but they were actually caught together. Apparently, in their younger years, they ran in the same circles, and a sting operation took them and several others down. Neither side of the family ever talks about it, and it remains an unspoken stain on family reunions and Christmas cards. Story 30. There's a big age gap between my siblings and me. One is 12 years older, the other 14. For years, I believed I was an accident, an unwanted mistake. Kids at school would mock me for it, and over time, I internalized it. The thought ate away at me, and eventually I fell into depression. It got so bad that I started acting out, making serious mistakes in school. Things escalated to the point where my parents had to agree to put me in therapy to prevent legal trouble. During one session, I told my therapist that I was a mistake, and he suggested I ask my parents directly. So, on the car ride home, I did. My mother's response completely shocked me. She told me that before I was born, she had suffered a miscarriage. At first, I felt awful, selfish even, for never knowing, for feeling sorry for myself when they had been through something so painful. But then she told me something that changed my entire perspective. She said that after that dark period, I was the one who brought joy and happiness back into the family. I was the light that pulled them out of grief. She even had a special nickname for me, one I had never heard before. That conversation changed everything. It took time, but I eventually climbed out of my depression. My relationship with my parents became stronger, and I finally understood my place in the family. Story 31. I don't know if this counts as a family secret, but it's not something we talk about often. My grandfather was murdered. He lived in a village with my grandmother and their kids. The neighbors had a son, about the same age as my dad, who was deep into addiction. He was always causing trouble, stealing and begging for money to support his habit. One day my grandfather had enough and told him off. A few days later, as my grandfather was about to get on his bike to go somewhere, the guy, high and out of his mind, came out and attacked him with a knife. No one else was around, so we don't know exactly how it played out. But in the end, my grandfather was stabbed. Instead of relying on the police, who, as far as the family could tell, never did much about it, his younger brother took matters into his own hands. He allegedly tracked the guy down and got revenge. I say allegedly because not even our family knows the full story, but there were plenty of rumors. Despite everything, there's no ongoing feud between the families. We even visit the neighbors sometimes. They make great cookies. Story 32. One day, a woman sent friend requests to me and my siblings on Facebook. None of us knew who she was, but we noticed that our aunt was a mutual friend. Curious, we asked our mom about her. The moment we did, she got very serious, even a little upset, and firmly told us that under no circumstances should we accept the request. Mind you, we're all adults, so my sister and I were both confused and intrigued. Ignoring our mother's warning, my sister messaged the woman to ask who she was. That's when we learned the truth. She had an affair with our father, and they had a daughter together. Our half-sister is about 2 years older than me and 2 years younger than my sister. Our parents and our other two siblings have no idea that we know about this. It's a strange feeling, knowing we have a sibling out there we'll probably never meet. If our dad ever found out that we uncovered the secret, I honestly don't know how he would react. Story 33. There's an entire branch of my family that no living relatives have ever met. My great-great-grandfather left my great-grandmother to be with a woman he met while working in the fields. Together, they started a whole new family line, one that none of our immediate or extended relatives have ever had contact with. The strangest part? My great-aunt, who was a high school teacher, once had a student with the same last name as her. At first, she thought nothing of it, But the kid looked oddly familiar. Then it hit her. He had the distinct family nose and earlobes. Curious, she started digging and eventually confirmed that he was the grandson of her own grandfather, the one who had abandoned the family decades earlier. That meant he was technically her second cousin. But because of the massive generational gap, he was nearly 40 years younger than her. It's strange to think about, but sometimes those distant family connections are a lot closer than we realize. Story 34. 5 years ago, my grandfather passed away from a form of Alzheimer's. Near the end, he told a story about my mom having another sibling, one who had been put up for adoption before he married my grandmother. At the time, we brushed it off as confused rambling. Fast forward 4.5 years. My mom decided to take one of those ancestry DNA tests. Not long after, she received a message from a man who showed up as a DNA match, a cousin. They started exchanging messages, and that's when things took a turn. He told my mom that he had been adopted, but had successfully found his birth mother a few years prior. His birth mother? My mom's half-sister. Apparently, her family had told her a different story about her origins. Something about being the daughter of a German immigrant. But here's where it gets even crazier. This half-sister has the same first name as my mom and the same middle name as my aunt, which is also my sister's middle name. It makes me wonder what other secrets my grandparents took to the grave. Story 35. I only recently found out that my uncle had been married before. He's in his early 50s and has always had the reputation of being a ladies' man, but no one in the family had ever mentioned a wife. One day my brother was messing around on Google and decided to look up our uncle. He found a record showing that a man with the same name and birthday had been married to a woman in New York City. But as far as we knew, our uncle had lived in Texas for as long as we could remember. It seemed like a strange coincidence, but possible. Curious, we decided to ask around. Our grandparents denied it completely, saying our uncle had never been married. My dad gave the same response. But then my cousin asked his mother, and her response was different. She just said, "How did you find out?" That's when we learned the truth. Years ago, before we were born, my uncle had been married to a black woman in NYC. He hid the marriage from the entire family because he was afraid his parents wouldn't approve. He and his wife lived together in New York, but she got involved with drugs, and their marriage fell apart when she went to rehab. She left him to get help, but my uncle never stopped caring for her. He even continued paying for her treatment long after their divorce. She eventually got clean, remarried, and had kids, but later relapsed and passed away from an overdose. My uncle was devastated, so he moved to Texas and never spoke about it again. The saddest part, my uncle has been saving money for his ex-wife's kids, hoping to help them with college. But since they don't share his last name, and NYC is a massive city, he's never been able to track them down. He's still searching for them to this day. And the most shocking part, he has no idea that we know. His parents still don't know either. Story 36. A very sad story from my mother's side of the family. Trigger warning, water injury, burn injury, death. I was supposed to have an uncle. Before modern temperature-controlled water heaters existed, my grandparents' first child was a son. One evening, when he was just a toddler, they ran a bath for him. The water was too hot, so they left it to cool. Somehow, he must have seen one of his toys floating in the tub and climbed in on his own. By the time they found him, the damage had already been done. He held on for a few days, but eventually passed away. My grandmother clung to her faith, believing that her son was now in a better place, but my grandfather never recovered. When he passed away many years later, my family discovered something heartbreaking. He had carried his son's cremated remains with him across the country for his entire life. In the end, his daughters made sure that father and son were laid to rest together. Their names are now side by side on the tombstone. Now that I have children of my own, I can't even imagine the horror my grandparents went through. Even writing this now brings tears to my eyes. Story 37. I've come to suspect that my dad may not be my biological father. It's not the possibility itself that surprises me. I have faint memories of my mom being single when I was very young. But what really shocks me is that no one in the family has ever spoken about it. There have been accidental hints over the years, but it's never been a real conversation. To be clear, it doesn't change anything for me. He's not a stepdad in my eyes. He's just dad. But at some point, I do think it should be discussed, especially since I'll need to know my biological family history as I get older. Based on my mom's old stories about failed relationships, I have a feeling of who my biological father might be. But it's just a guess. And if I'm right, I have zero interest in finding him. He sounds like a terrible person. On top of that, my mom had to restart her life in her late 20s because her ex-husband hit someone with his car. The victim's family took everything, leaving my mom with nothing. I don't think he's my father since I was likely conceived later, but his mistake completely derailed my mom's life. And yet, if that hadn't happened, my life wouldn't exist at all. So, yay. I have a feeling there's more to the story, but I don't think my mom wants to relive it. Maybe one day I'll know the full truth. Story 38. A distant cousin of my father was once in charge of the Rhodesian State Bank. He held a high-ranking position in the apartheid administration, responsible for sourcing foreign currency. According to family stories, he only took the job because his family was under threat. Despite working for the government, he managed to convince them that he was loyal enough to be granted limited travel. His children were sent to an English public school for several years, but he himself wasn't allowed to leave the country at the same time as his wife, likely in case he tried to escape. Then luck intervened. While his wife was shopping in the US, an emergency came up that required him to fly to London immediately. The moment he arrived, security services met him at the airport. He was debriefed, then reunited with his family. No one in my family even knew he had made it home to England until after the Rhodesian administration fell, and he was given the all clear. He left behind immense wealth, power, large country estates, and an unimaginable level of privilege. To this day, I'm not sure if he truly saw the warning signs and jumped ship before it sank, or if his story of coercion was legitimate. Either way, he was certainly an interesting man. Story 39. I just learned this a couple of weeks ago, and I haven't been able to talk about it, so I need to get this off my chest. My mom's family has always been extremely judgmental. They criticize anything and anyone that doesn't fit their idea of a perfect family. It was suffocating, so I eventually moved away to escape it. Something about their rigid attitude always felt off to me, and now I finally know why. My grandfather has always had a strained relationship with my uncle. He constantly berated him, talked down to him, and blamed him for being rebellious and a poor student. When my uncle was in high school, they forced him to join the Navy, claiming it was his own fault for not succeeding academically. Even though they knew he had a learning disability, they just didn't care. A few weeks ago, I found out the real reason behind my grandfather's resentment. My grandmother had an affair decades ago, and my uncle was the result. My grandfather either figured it out or my grandmother eventually came clean. But my uncle is not his biological son. He still doesn't know. My grandmother confessed this to my mom before she passed away last year. And if that wasn't enough, my other uncle was recently arrested for possessing child pornography. That one isn't exactly a secret anymore, but right now everyone in the family is doing their best to ignore it. For a family that gave me endless grief for having tattoos and being in rock bands, they can all go to hell. I'm so glad I left. Story 40. My mom's dad cheated on my grandma and then married the much younger woman he had the affair with. But that's not even the most shocking part for me. My grandfather was, by all accounts, a terrible person. I won't go into details, but throughout my mom's childhood, he treated her, her siblings, and my grandmother horribly. Later, I learned that my step-grandmother wasn't much better. But when my mom got pregnant with me, suddenly my grandfather and his new wife were very interested in being involved in my life. Despite wanting nothing to do with them, my mom allowed it. She figured that whatever issues she had with them, I still deserved to have a relationship with my grandparents. So, throughout my childhood, my parents took me to visit them, enduring time with people they despised, just so I could make happy memories. And I did. I loved going to my grandparents' house in the countryside. I had no idea who they really were. Then when I turned 19, I found out the truth. My grandparents were awful people, and my parents had only tolerated them because they treated me well. My entire childhood perception of them was shattered. I still struggle to reconcile my memories with the reality of who they were. Story 41. This isn't the most shocking story here, but it's definitely one of the strangest. Apparently, my grandma had a habit of stealing the most random things and hoarding them in the basement. After she passed away, my brother and I were exploring her house. I was about 12 at the time, when we stumbled upon a massive pile of junk. Among all the clutter, I found an old diary titled Confessions. At first, I was too freaked out to touch it. I had no idea what kind of confessions she had written, and for a while, I was convinced she might have been hiding something much darker. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Turns out it was a record of every single thing she had ever stolen. Not for bragging, but so that someone could return the items after she was gone. In a weird way, it was almost sweet. Her collection included stolen signs, pet collars, cold sausages, bin lids, stickers, and all sorts of other completely random things. She had taken stuff from local businesses, her neighbors, and even total strangers. But the most bizarre entry by far, the time she tried to steal snake eggs from a zoo enclosure. Let's just say it did not go well for her. Story 42. I always thought my family moved to the countryside to enjoy the peaceful, rural life. Turns out that was just the cover story. In reality, my parents were running from over $100,000 in debt. The idea was that living in the middle of nowhere would make it harder for debt collectors to track them down. How did I find out? The hard way. When I was a minor, I opened a bank account, and my mom was the co-signer. I never thought much about it as an adult. It was just something that existed, like an old phone number you no longer use. Then one Saturday at the grocery store, my card was declined. No big deal, right? Sometimes card readers mess up. But in the middle of nowhere, banks 1, close early, 2, aren't open on weekends, and 3, don't have service reps available. So I had to put everything back on the shelves while trying not to cry, all while listening to an automated voice repeating business hours. I spent the entire weekend sick with anxiety. Monday finally came, and I walked into the bank, still holding on to the hope that it was just a glitch. I asked about my account, expecting to hear that my $1,200 in savings was still there. It wasn't. Every cent was gone. At first, I thought I had been hacked. Maybe an identity thief had drained my account. Nope. The withdrawal was completely legal, sanctioned by someone, I can't remember exactly who. It's all a blur of panic. I was taken into the bank manager's office, where they handed me a box of tissues while I had a full-blown meltdown. Here's what happened. Debt collectors finally tracked down my mom and sent her a letter demanding payment. Her response? She closed her own bank account to avoid it. But since she was still legally tied to my account, they took my money instead. My mother never touched that account, never put money in, never took money out. But because her name was on it, my savings was fair game. That money was supposed to help me move into a house across state. Without it, I couldn't pay the security deposit, and someone else got the place. The aftermath? I cut off contact with my parents. They acted like I had somehow stolen from them, and even told me I owed them for raising me. I was never repaid. The bank couldn't get my money back. I removed my mother from my account and now tell everyone to do the same if they have a cosigner. This happened over 2 years ago, and I still haven't been able to rebuild my savings. I keep a picture of the house I almost got on my desktop. It was pet-friendly, a rare find these days. And yes, I'm still bitter. Story 43. I had always heard stories about my great-aunt being blind, but I never actually met her until later in life. When I did, I noticed the scars on her temple. After she left, I asked my grandpa, her brother, about them. That's when I learned the truth. When my great-aunt was younger, there was a serial rapist terrorizing her town. Her husband worked at the gun store my grandpa managed. One night before leaving the house, he told her to lock the door because of the danger. She did. A few hours later, she saw breaking news on TV. The police had trapped the rapist inside a house, where he was holding a woman and her daughter hostage. Then as the man leaned out the window, holding the little girl and shouting at police, she recognized him. It was her husband. Without hesitation, she went upstairs, grabbed his gun, and put it to her own temple. I don't know what happened to him. I never asked. He's probably dead or in prison. But my great-aunt lived, and her scars told a story she rarely spoke about. Story 44. My grandfather worked on the Manhattan Project at Oak Ridge before being sent to Europe as part of the ALSOS mission. Eventually, he was deployed to France and Germany, gathering intelligence on Nazi scientific research. Meanwhile, my grandmother was one of the few Vietnamese people working in France, involved in the bureaucracy of French Indochina. When France fell and Japan expanded its control over Indochina, she stayed in Vichy France, using the network she had built to funnel intelligence back to the Allies about Japan's movements and its collaboration with the Vichy regime. They met in France after the war, fell in love, and got married. Eventually, they moved and settled down in central Vietnam. Story 45. My mom had an aunt, technically a half-aunt, named Edna, though no one ever talked about her. She was born to my great-grandmother before she married my great-grandfather, and from what I've been told, she struggled with mental illness. As a child, she was much older than my grandfather and his siblings, and she used to beat them. When my great-grandmother passed away at a young age, my great-grandfather took Edna to a home, left her there, and never looked back. No one spoke of her again. My great-aunt, who passed away a few years ago, once said that she could still remember Edna running after the car as they drove away. That was the last time anyone in the family saw her, until my uncle found out about her nearly 30 years ago. Curious, he took his wife and kids to visit Edna at the home, despite my grandfather's fury when he found out. The staff was shocked that she had visitors. They never knew she had family. During the visit, Edna revealed something unexpected. She had once given birth to a baby, but it was taken from her. It turned out she was pregnant when she was dropped off at the home. The father was suspected to be a neighbor she had mentioned before. Strangely enough, he had the same name as my great-grandfather. But when my uncle told my grandfather that he planned to ask the man about it, my grandfather threatened to kill him if he did. The neighbor has since passed away. Edna likely has too. Such a sad story. Story 46. I had to make a fake account to post this. In the early 90s, my grandfather was laid off from a major company. Instead of staying in the US, he and some of his friends decided to move to a foreign country, where they bought massive homes and lived lavishly off their savings. While there, they all married young women, very young. My grandfather's new wife was only 17 at the time, making her younger than my mom and her siblings. Eventually, they had children, my uncles and aunts, and later moved back to the US. That means I now have a step-grandmother in her 30s and uncles, sheer aunts who are in middle school or junior high. Recently, I found out that one of my supposed uncle's aunts isn't actually my grandfather's child. Turns out there was an affair, and my grandfather and his wife moved far away to cover it up. And if that wasn't enough, I was also contacted by someone on Facebook who turned out to be my grandfather's biological child, my mom's sibling. They were adopted out of the family and are actually only 4 years older than me. The wildest part? They live really close to me. We've even met a few times. Story 47. Turns out I have a black uncle. I didn't find out until my grandmother, in a semi-lucid moment while bedridden, let it slip to my aunt. But it's not what you might think. When my father was a kid, his family employed a young black housekeeper, around 16 or 17 years old. Sometimes she would bring her little brother over to play with my dad and his siblings. Then something happened. Either things were bad at home, or their parents died in an accident. I don't remember the exact details, but whatever it was, the younger brother was going to be placed into foster care. His sister was old enough to be emancipated, but she wasn't going to be allowed custody of her little brother. My grandfather, a doctor in a small rural southern town in the 1950s or 60s, quietly made arrangements. He called in a favor from a lawyer friend and secretly adopted the boy so that he could stay with his sister. Given the time period and my grandfather's position, this was something that likely would have damaged his reputation if it had become public. So the entire adoption was kept a secret. I've never met him. The family barely knows anything about him, though I've heard he has a family of his own and is doing well. My grandmother came this close to taking that secret to her grave. She missed it by just a few months. Story 48. My father was one of those outlaw bikers Hollywood loves to glamorize. But instead of being the rugged anti-hero, he was the crazy, unpredictable guy who didn't seem to grasp how normal society worked. My mother, on the other hand, worked as a police and fire dispatcher in our small town. This meant she could keep my dad and uncle one step ahead of the law in their drug business. For 3 years, we had a grow operation running out of our detached garage and never once got raided. Eventually, my mom got sick of my dad's drunken, violent behavior and kicked him out. He still came around whenever he felt like it, usually after having a few too many at his favorite biker bar down the road. Things escalated when he beat the hell out of one of my mom's male friends, thinking they were dating. She took out a restraining order, and he disappeared after catching an assault charge. He was gone for a few weeks. Then one night he came back. I woke up to knocking on my window. I was young, just a little kid, and I started crying, thinking it was the boogeyman. My crying woke up my half-brother, who also heard the knocking. He opened the window and saw my dad staring back at him, huge, wild eyes. Later, we would find out he was tripping on acid that night. He told us to let him in. We ran and told my mom. She immediately called the police. Since my mom was a dispatcher, the local cops weren't playing around. They sent an officer to our house immediately, but my dad ambushed him, took his gun, and beat the hell out of him in our front yard before he even had a chance to radio for help. Now my dad had felony assault charges on him, and he was on the run again. He left his baby blue '63 Impala parked in front of our house, and my mom had it reparked while the cops staked it out, waiting for him to return. He never did. A few weeks later, the police called off the active search, convinced he had skipped state. They impounded his car and moved on. Then out of nowhere, on a beautiful summer day, my dad rolled up on his Harley. My mom heard the pipes before he even got to the house and had already called the cops by the time he parked. He hugged me, gave me a skateboard for my 4th birthday, which was still a few weeks away, and then asked if he could come inside for some iced tea. I ran inside and asked my mom, "Can Dad come in for some iced tea?" She replied, "He knows the rules, Joe in 00B. He can make his own decisions." I thought that meant sure, he can come in. So I went back outside and told him it was okay. He hesitated, then followed me inside. I don't think he even made it to the kitchen before the cops swarmed the house and tackled him out of nowhere. I barely saw what happened. I was scooped up and put in my room with my half-brother and sister, but I peeked out the door just in time to see them marching him out. It couldn't have taken more than a minute from the moment they grabbed him to when he was being hauled out the door in cuffs. That was the last time I ever saw him. I know he did 8 years in Joliet, then drifted between Arizona and New Mexico, selling meth and acid until he got arrested in Vegas. After that, he was in and out of prison. Eventually, he became a ward of the state, living off his disability check. His sister, who had adopted him as a baby, became his legal guardian, paying his bills while he spent his days smoking dope and drinking homemade wine. He died at 48 years old from his 4th heart attack. My mother always told me that before Vietnam, he was loving and caring. But when he came back, he couldn't drink enough to make the memories go away. That was the beginning of the end. For almost 2 decades, we lived in hiding. He got close to finding us a few times. My mother even had an emergency plan drilled into our heads in case a strange man ever approached us, claiming to be our father. Looking back, I think she knew that if he ever found us, things wouldn't end well. Story 49. In a way, I was the family secret, or rather, who my dad was. The details would take a long time to explain, but essentially my mom hid me from my father. She told me my entire life that he had died before I was born, making sure I would never think to look into it. She even went so far as to make up a completely fictional man, providing pictures, though never any of her with him, and crafting a whole story about how he passed away. For 20 years, I never once questioned it. Meanwhile, my real dad and his mother tried to reach out to me over the years, but my mom and my maternal grandmother always managed to shut them down, sometimes with threats. Then when I was 20, my dad found me on Facebook. He told me everything and backed it up with proof. Photos of us together when I was just a toddler. Pictures of him and my mom before their falling out. That's when I learned the truth. My mom had wanted nothing to do with him after their breakup and erased him from my life entirely. It was devastating to learn, especially for my dad's mother. She had spent decades longing to know me, and when she finally got the chance, it was only in the last 2 years of her life. Now my dad and I have built a relationship. We text once a week, and every time we do, it feels like a small piece of something grand.